Hi there, welcome to HUD's History. Today's lesson is all about the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century and looking at the Tanzimat reforms. Now, the Ottoman Empire had taken down the Byzantine Empire in the 15th century, and we know that it had become a gunpowder empire after it obtained black powder. And now we're looking at the 19th century during the time of imperialism for a lot of European nations, and the Ottoman Empire is looking to do some reforms to try and kind of modernize itself or westernize. So we're going to be looking at how they did that and what effects that had on the empire itself. So we're looking at the reforms in the Ottoman Empire during the 19th century. So getting closer to that 20th century and pretty much the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had started to become weak as it was, just because of different conflicts it had been involved with, and just because of the changing state of the Ottoman Empire itself. It had lost some different lands to other nations and empires, and it is trying to reform itself in order to maintain a strong presence in the Middle East on the border of Eastern Europe. So, what were these Tanzimat reforms? They are a series of reforms that were created between about 1839 and 1876 under a couple different sultans. And they become heavily influenced because of the Europeans. The Europeans had gone through a Enlightenment period already, and now the Ottoman Empire is kind of doing the same thing. They are trying to change some of the old ideas where they are going from the reign of basically a theocracy to that of what is considered a modern state, which is where the European nations had been heading because of the Enlightenment. Why are these reforms necessary? Well, there are a series of wars that happen, and the Ottomans fight with a lot of different groups, including the Greeks, the Europeans, the Russians, and they basically came to this realization that the Europeans had become very much more advanced technologically, scientifically, and the Ottoman Empire itself is now realizing that they are not as strong as they thought they were. Yes, they had been very strong during what you consider the medieval time period, during the time of taking down the Byzantine Empire in the 15th century. But now, because of things like the Renaissance and the Reformation, the scientific revolution that had been occurring in Europe, the Europeans kind of got that hand up on everybody else because of those things. And then when industrialization happens, you now have more effective weaponry and tools that are benefiting the Europeans. And the Ottoman Empire realizes that they need to do something to basically change their ways. Now, they had always traditionally been an Islamic empire based off of religion. And they're not going to just change the religion. What they're going to do is they're going to try and reevaluate the institution of religion, but then try and introduce new things into their education system and other areas in order to modernize and make themselves become more like Europe in that sense without losing some of those traditions. So, what else is going on? You have some nationalist tendencies that are going on in the European provinces. These are the areas in the Balkan states where you would see places like Greece and what we know as Yugoslavia, places of those areas where there were Christian subjects because they were practicing the religion of Christianity, even though they were part of the Ottoman Empire. They're trying to kind of quash that because they don't want to see any breakaways of the provinces to new Christian states. They want to kind of keep that loyalty of Christian subjects. They're also trying to break down what's known as the millet system. The millet system was where each community basically got to control and live by their own rules and laws based off of their religion of those communities, whether it be Islam or Christianity or Judaism. So there are some internal things happening within the Ottoman Empire, and they are trying to solve some of those issues without losing a lot of their tradition, but also trying to come into the present day at this point. So they're going to have to go from what we know as theocracy to a new reform society. If you don't know what theocracy is, basically it is where the government is controlled by someone based off a divine guidance, or they're basically regarded as a divine individual. Most kings and queens in Europe before the Enlightenment were considered to rule by divine right, and even in the not the European, but the Chinese um, empires, a lot of times they were ruled through what's known as the mandate of heaven, basically that they had a divine right to rule there. So that was theocracy, but we know that in the Enlightenment in Europe, that changes and it goes from the right of the divine rulers to the government being controlled and ruled by the people for the people. So the Ottoman sultans, they are going to see this change trying to take place during the time of the Tanzimat reforms. They're also going to try and make the military and the government bureaucracy more efficient. It had become very bloated, the government bureaucracy in the Ottoman Empire, to where it exploded and it was very inefficient. It did not get a lot of things done correctly. It caused a lot of basically corruption, and the institutions and buildings were kind of falling apart because their infrastructure was not doing well either. They also wanted to make the law more of a civil code that was controlled by non-religious groups. So they're trying to take it out of the control of the religious elites, of the religious institutions, and put it into more of what we would consider bureaucratic hands. Even though they're trying to make it more efficient with the government, they don't want the different communities to all have different laws for different groups. They're trying to make it basically more equal. A lot of the provisions that are going to come out of the Tanzimat reforms come about in what's known as the Noble Edict of the Rose Chamber. This was established in 1839. And basically, what this document does is it guarantees a lot of things for the people in the Ottoman Empire, and that is regardless of what religion they practice or what race or ethnicity they were. So things like security of life, property, honor, these are ideas that are seen in Europe and in the Americas during the Enlightenment period, and now it's coming here to the Middle East and specifically in the Ottoman Empire. The other thing that's going to happen is with this edict, it's going to basically standardize the way that they tax people. Previously, the taxation in Islamic empires were all based off religion. If you were a Muslim, converted, or I should say, a born Muslim, converted Muslim, or a non Muslim, and you paid a higher tax depending on where you were at. So if you were a non-Muslim, you paid the highest tax. If you were a converted Muslim, you paid the middle tax. And if you were a born Muslim, you paid the lowest tax. So they're trying to standardize that across the empire to make it basically more fair for everybody. They're also trying to eliminate the abuses that were coming about because of that. They also are trying to establish a fair method of doing some military conscription and training. If you go back before in the Ottoman Empire, a lot of their training for the military was based off the Janissary style. The Janissaries were Christian boys who were taken from their Christian communities and trained into this elite fighting force. But there are issues with the Janissaries, and they are going to kind of become more outdated. And so you're looking for new ways of getting people into the military and strengthening the military itself because of the conflicts that have been going on between the Ottomans and other groups. Well, what about religion? There was a promise that there would be equality for non-Muslims. This is going to be Christians and Jews that are living in the empire. However, it's not always carried out because the empire is so big that you still have provinces and you still have provincial rule. So even though the big federal government, as you would say, like the Sultan and his council, would make these decrees and say, okay, you have equality and able to live no matter what your religion is, they're not always carried out. But it is starting to allow some of those changes to take place among the empire. And there's other things that are going to be implemented, and that is going to allow this particular Sultan Hassa to make some effective changes as what's known as the Grand Vizier. And he's going to be that for like 6 terms. So he's actually there for quite a while. Some of these reforms are going to include having a new secular school system, which means that it's not based off religion. You're going to reorganize the army, and they're going to do it based off the German state of Prussia, who had a very good conscription system. That's why they become the strongest German state and effectively become the German state that will unify Germany into a unified German nation. There's going to be a creation of representative assemblies, meaning that they are going to have representation for the people in the Ottoman Empire. And you're going to have some introduction of codes for law system that's going to be modeled after France, basically like the Napoleonic Code when Napoleon had instituted reforms in France after he took control. So this is all going to become what we see as the westernization of the Ottoman Empire. And that's going to help it modernize because basically, if they don't, they are going to be left behind and it's going to not do well for them as they end up going into the 20th century when a lot of places are becoming more efficient in not just military, but also in production, manufacturing, things of that nature. So, how do the reforms look when you are changing education? Previously, everything had been done by religious institutions. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to make basically a school system that's put under a central ministry, kind of like a Department of Education, if you will. And that is to take it outside of the control of religious authorities. And that is to promote other areas. A lot of societies at this time, basically you had primary education was in a village or a neighborhood religious institution. It wasn't a general common period of education for students. It wasn't compulsory, meaning that you weren't compelled to go to school when you were younger and then go up to college or vocation or whatnot. That wasn't happening. That doesn't happen until you get to basically the 20th century and many nations start implementing compulsory education for students because they outlaw child labor to the point where you do not go to work when you're young, you go to school instead and you learn education, you learn, information, and you learn skills. So you are starting to see this change in education, not just in places like Europe and the Americas, but also now in the Middle East. Here is a primary source. This is from the Sultan at the time in 1856, and he basically is talking about how um, all the subjects in the empire, they're going to get civil and military schools of the government, meaning it is a government run system. It is not run by the religious institutions. And then it says that every community is authorized to establish public schools of science, art, and industry. Okay. And it also says that only the method of instruction and the choice of professors in schools of this class shall be under the control of a mixed council of public instruction. And they have to be named by his command. Basically, he's saying that it is up to him and his council to determine the types of professors who are going to be instructional in these places and that they need to be teaching science, art, and industry. That is more than what they would have gotten if it was just in a religious institution, which is going to basically lead to the learning of religion and some literature. Previously, when you were taught in the religious institutes, you got scripture, no matter what religion you were. You got some basic literacy to read and write, and then you got some numeracy, some basic math, and then you learn all the traditions of your religion. And because these are religious institutes, they are staffed by either the imam, which is going to be in Islam, or it's going to be like the priest in Catholicism, Christianity. Um, they are a known person, and they basically get paid by parents to teach the kids that specific religious information. But now there becomes this focus on other subjects, things like science, things like math, industry, because of the Industrial Revolution and bringing industry into the Ottoman Empire. So that is a huge change that you're going to see with the Tanzimat reforms. Well, who oversees all these changes? These are going to be a change that's established by the state courts. Um, Previously, you had with Islamic empires, most governments had a religious council that kind of oversaw everything from marriage to taxes, yes, to education. But now they're saying we're going to separate out that so that it's not the religious council that is going to oversee education. It's going to be these independent state courts that do it. The other things that come about in these reforms by the Tanzimat is taxes in the military. So there is a push to remove religious affiliation from taxes, and not to promote more equality within the Ottoman Empire. So you're now taxed not based off of your religion like previously. The other thing is the military. The Janissaries have been this big fighting force since the early days of the Ottoman Empire. But unfortunately, the Janissaries had kind of become inefficient, and they were basically an outdated group. And because of that, the Sultan didn't really see them as being that great. There was one Sultan who was like, "Yeah, we kind of need to get rid of them." So that Sultan is gotten backlash by the Janissaries who rebel. And then the next Sultan comes in and says, I'm going to use these guys to kind of get on their side. And when he does that, he actually massacres them in this massacre known as the Auspicious Incident. And with that, you get rid of the Janissaries, and now you're going to introduce a new type of military system based off of Western European style. Specifically, you have it coming from the German state of Prussia. But because the old way of raising military was that they had taken these Christian males and taken them from their communities and basically introduced them and trained them, now you have to find a way to build up a bigger military. What they do is the Ottoman Empire establishes a new treasury system. And what it does is it is specifically there in order to fund a military, to promote conscription, to get more people into the military and to pay them, and then to modernize the military itself to get the more modern weapons that the Europeans have. They even are able to create what's known as the reserve military. Most countries nowadays have some sort of reserve. They usually have an active force and a reserve force, and the reserve force is usually people who have been in military previously, only for a few years, but it's not their career, but they still are in the reserves. That allows you to have a huge backup military if you ever need to go to war. The Ottomans do this, so they have an active military that's about 130,000 strong. But with a reserve force, this allows them to have a military force of about 480,000 men that's ready for battle. This is actually up from a very small amount of about 10,000 that had been there when they first started trying to promote reforms for the military. So you can see they did a tremendous job in creating a military that will be able to fight. And this is what allows them to be a fighting force when you get into World War One. Even though the Ottoman Empire will become pretty weak at that point, they still have a large fighting force. Now, the Tanzimat reform it was going strong, but unfortunately, you are going to have a halt in the mid 1870s because you're going to have kind of an overthrow by another sultan. And you're going to get a new constitution that is implemented. That's in 1876. The problem is that when the Tanzimat was trying to kind of take the power and pull it out of all these different communities and groups and kind of centralize it, some of that authority had become concentrated in the hands of the Sultan himself, and he kind of became very dictatorial. That's why you had things like the auspicious incident where you basically massacre your janissary force. The new constitution is going to transfer that power from the Sultan and his council, which was the appointed Senate, and it's going to move that power to what was the popularly elected lower house, which is called the Chamber of Deputies. So now you're seeing more of that democratic balance, and you are moving away from that theocratic um, control of one person ruling by divine right to now you have an elected group that has power that can make laws and distribute funds for whatever. So you're seeing this change that happened with the Tanzimat. Yes, it does do some good because they are able to raise a military force. They're able to They're able to get more modernized because of the education system that they develop, but they have a power struggle internally that is going to change with this constitution. They actually have another constitution after this where they amended even more. And then once you get to World War One, then you're going to see the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, and then you're going to get what's remaining, which is going to be present day Turkey. So that's the Tanzimat reforms, and we can see here, you can see the map, the territory that is lost, going from 1800 to 1877, and then more territories lost going 1913, and then where the Ottoman Empire was in World War One, and then you have present day Turkey, which is in the green above me. Not quite what it is today, but somewhat. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I hope you liked it, so you can like it and whatnot, and you can subscribe. The social tip for the day is moisturizer. So if you get up in the morning and you wash your face, make sure you put on some moisturizer. It helps your skin. It keeps it clean. It helps moisturize it, keeps it soft. And if you use a moisturizer with sunscreen, it helps protect you from the sun so you don't get as many wrinkles, and you prevent things like skin cancer on your face. So take care of your face. Make sure that you wash it, use some moisturizer and other things that you need in order to keep it looking nice and pretty. So until next time, have a good one. This has been HUD's History. See you guys next time.